And I've used the metaphor of being on the ocean with your surfboard and a wave is coming along and you didn't create the wave, you didn't create the ocean, you probably didn't make the surfboard. You're just smart enough that when the wave came, you get up and you ride the wave. Yeah. And that's what happened to me. When the wave went back out and I had my surfboard and I'm paddling back out and there weren't any more waves, I thought I could make the wave. And that's what I tried to do. And I found out it was pretty hard to make a wave. I was waiting for the product that I had launched to do well, and no wave came.
Welcome to the Seven Hats Podcast. My name is Yuval Selik, and I've been on the entrepreneurial roller coaster for over 20 years. I've experienced it all throughout my journey: the grind, burnout, failure, and ultimately, success. The turning point for me was realizing that building a successful company is meaningless if you neglect the other significant areas of your life. So today, I'm inviting you to join me on an adventure through those 7 areas, what I call the 7 hats. Every week, my guests and I will drop valuable insights and pearls of wisdom, helping, motivating, and inspiring you to get your 7 hats in order and deliver real impact with meaning. So let's get going. Welcome, Seven Hatters. In this episode, we speak with Marvin Storm and dive deep into hat number 4, the entrepreneur, as we contemplate our exit before strapping ourselves on the entrepreneurial roller coaster. 80% of all businesses that are listed for sale never sell. But you don't need to be part of that statistic if you plan your exit from the start. Marvin reminds us that pilots don't pack their parachutes when the engine is on fire, and you shouldn't either. With 4 decades of experience, and not to mention the host of the Business Exit Stories podcast, there is no one better than Marvin to show us the way. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to know Marvin and start packing our parachute before it's too late by welcoming Marvin to the 7 Hats. Marvin, welcome to the 7 Hats.
It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Oh, listen, I'm really excited to speak with you today. Part of that is for my audience, and part of it is for selfish reasons. I have a couple of companies that I'm running at the moment, and I'm probably making all the mistakes in the book when it comes to planning for the best exit. I actually just interviewed Mike Fata, the founder of Manitoba Harvest, who exited not too long ago, not just for 1 9-figure exit, but 2. Amazing.
Which is unusual. So I'm sure that, like me, the 7 Hatters are also extremely interested in this topic. But before we pack up the parachute and dive into how entrepreneurs can maximize their exit strategies, let's learn a little bit more about Marvin, shall we? Well, I'll try to give you some insight of where this country bumpkin came from.
All right, fantastic. Let's start at the beginning. So tell the 7 Hatters where you're from originally and what childhood looked like.
Well, I grew up in a small town in South Dakota, not too far from Mount Rushmore in the Black Hills, for those of you that are somewhat familiar with the geography of that part of the world. And I grew up on, the rural part of the town that I lived in. It was a booming metropolis of about 3,500 people with a large population of ranchers and farmers that surrounded. That was kind of our town that I lived in was kind of the commerce hub and the county seat from where I lived. My father was an entrepreneur. He was raised on a ranch, grew up in the middle of nowhere. I've been out to the old Storm family homestead, and I can remember the first time in my adult life that I went back and spent some time there. What was so stark or amazing to me is the ranch it's literally in the middle of nowhere.
Wow.
100 miles from the nearest town. And the winters in that part of the world in South Dakota on the plains there, they can get pretty brutal. A lot of wind, a lot of snow, drifting snow. My grandfather was a rancher who raised horses and sheep. And my father, his job during the summers was to herd sheep. And he had a little trailer house, kind of like an Airstream trailer that he spent months at a time out, very desolate, lonely with his sheepdog and, herding sheep, taking care of them, shooting coyotes. And, That was the world that my father grew up in. If something broke on the ranch, you didn't drive to town or go down to the hardware store and buy something to fix it. You had to figure it out and make it work. Because of that, my dad became he had an aptitude for mechanics. I often think if he'd went on with his education, he'd have ended up a mechanical engineer or something like that. He was very bright, very mechanically adept. And when he moved to town after my grandfather passed away, he was the only son that stayed on the ranch. Was just 17, 18 years old at the time, and with my grandmother, and they just had to move to town. So they sold the homestead and moved to town, and he got a job as a mechanic and eventually left that employment environment and opened up his own shop. And I can remember as a kid going out to his shop, which was outside of town, walking out for the couple of miles that it was, and spending my summers there washing parts and watching him work, and rolling under the car with these creepers and a cigarette hanging out of his side of his mouth, and grease on his face and sweat pouring, in the hot summers that were there, very hot, 90, 100 degrees out, and he's in his shop with heavy, coveralls on, and, working on everything from diesel trucks to farm equipment to cars, pickups, you name it, he could fix it. So that's the kind of the world that I grew up in. My mom was a bookkeeper. She had a full-time job during the day, and then kept books on the evenings and weekends for my dad. And they worked hard. They were blue-collar, hardworking fabric that this country is built on and established on. And over the years, he built up his business, had a number of mechanics working for him, and expanded his garage, built his own building, and later added a towing service. And so he had a lot of entrepreneurial pursuits. And I saw the ups and the downs of that life of being an entrepreneur. He worked 2 jobs. He actually, when he first opened up and left employment as a mechanic and opened up his own shop, he took another job to make sure there was always bread on the table. Wow. Working for the railroad. So he would go down. They had these big diesel engines that needed fuel. And in the winter, they would put sand on board these big diesel engines, and the sand would be let out in front of the steel wheels to give them traction when there would be ice on the tracks. And so he would go down and spend 5 to 7 hours every night, 5 days a week, working and fueling and in the switch yards, moving the engines around, getting them ready for the engineers the next day. And then he'd, after midnight, he would come home and be up at 5:30, 6 o'clock to go into the shop and work. And he worked 6 days a week. And vacations were not something that I was really familiar with, only taking 2 my whole childhood or teenage years. Just wasn't part of the agenda. That's kind of the world that I grew up in. And my dad, really didn't want me to follow his footsteps. He wanted me to get an education, which I did. I got my degree in accounting and went to work for a Big 4 accounting firm. And after a few years doing that, I was playing pickup basketball with a group. For several years, we would meet at 4 o'clock on Tuesday afternoons, and we would play 2.5 hours of pickup basketball. And I met a guy there that later became a co-founder to me. And, we'd play these basketball games, and afterwards we would talk shop and just talk about what's going on in our individual lives. And before you know it, we were turning in our resignations and striking out on our own. We had rented a 300 square foot office and an office building downtown, and I was in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we had 2 desks and 2 phones, and the desks faced each other, and we were in business. And we built up that business, which was in kind of the equipment leasing world. And we just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Wow. Which isn't good for a young entrepreneur. I was like 27 years old at the time when we struck out on our own. Things went well. We grew that to 60, 70 people and 2 floors of an office building in downtown. And I really thought I was pretty smart. Things were going pretty well and making a lot of money, a lot more than my peers at the time. I just thought that I had it figured out until I didn't. The economy changed, the tax laws changed. We were somewhat reliant on, investment tax credits, and when we would, structure these leasing transactions and extract the tax benefits out of them, and at the time, and the tax laws changed, the economy changed, and then I wasn't so smart anymore. Business that used to roll in and we didn't have to do much to get it, all of a sudden became very challenging.
Wow.
And I thought I could figure it out. I just thought that.
We all get to that place, and I can't wait to delve a little bit deeper into that side of the business. A couple more questions, kind of going back a little bit. So, did you have any siblings, or were you an only child?
No, I had 2 brothers. One quite a bit younger than myself, like 9 years younger than myself. I had a brother that was about my same age, and we 3 boys, and parents that were both working hard, and so we had a lot of independence. For those in your audience that are a little bit older, like myself, that remember the Andy Taylor and Opie Taylor, from Mayberry, on the Andy Griffith Show, where at the opening scene, Andy Taylor, the sheriff, and his 5-6-year-old son are headed out with their fishing poles to go fishing. That was kind of the world that I grew up in. A lot of independence. We would disappear in the morning during the summers, and we would roll in, 7, 8 o'clock at night, completely on our own, doing whatever we would want to do. And so it was a very, I think, hardy and freedom-laced childhood.
Did your brothers end up becoming entrepreneurs, or what are they doing?
No, both of my brothers actually got involved in some form or another in the automotive field, working as mechanics or in part stores and things of that nature, and involved in retailing of cars and things of that nature. And one of my brothers had a muffler shop for a few years, and before he went back and went to work in managing some hardware stores. But they stayed in that part of the world. When I turned 18, all you saw were my taillights. I was headed out of town.
Did you? That's hysterical. So they followed in your dad's footsteps, and you just jetted out. But did you grow up in a religious household? And if you did, how did that influence you early on?
Well, I think the influence is that I understood the peaks and valleys of entrepreneurship. I didn't have any rosy-colored eyeglasses of not working hard, or that you just made a bunch of money, although early in my career, that's kind of how it was. But, in subsequent businesses, I had the challenge of meeting payroll and the stress that comes with being an entrepreneur when you don't know if you're going to make that next payroll, and beg, borrowing, and stealing to make sure that it happens. And then being blindsided, as I said. Things beyond your control sometimes take over, and, you try to figure it out. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't.
So you did grow up in a religious household, is that correct?
Yeah, I did. My household wasn't necessarily religious. My dad and mother weren't religious at the time, but I had that sort of proclivity and sort of drifted in that way.
And then you went on a mission to South Africa at that point early on. Was that before you started your business career, or was that during?
I was 19 years old, 20 years old at the time. I spent almost 3 years in Southern Africa and South Africa, what was then Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Namibia, and some places like that. I spent time roaming the country in that part of the world, and it was really an education. I learned how third world countries function and the economies in that part of the world, and the poverty that I saw. Some of the happiest people on the world didn't have 10 cents to rub together, and they were just happy people. It created a lasting impression on me, and has always made grateful. I can remember returning to the U.S. as 22-year-old at the time. And I literally got down at JFK and kissed the asphalt.
Wow.
I was so grateful to be back in the U.S. When I really gained an understanding of some of the politics in that part of the world, when there was apartheid in South Africa at the time, and some of the inequities there, racial inequities, economic inequities. Coming from this country, for those that don't make it outside and don't live in other countries, we really have a great underappreciation for the structure politically and economically and culturally that we have in this country. We're not perfect, but in my opinion, we just underappreciate the liberties and freedoms that we have in this country. We just take them for granted.
Yeah, I find it so amazing. I just interviewed Don Larson. He's the owner of Sunshine Nut Company. And what he does, he gives 90% of his profits back to the Mozambique community where he actually resides right now. And him and I were speaking about the poverty there, but also the amazing individuals who find some sort of peace and happiness where they are. And in the US, we get pissed off if our cheeseburger comes without cheese, and so we totally don't get what it's like to live in, communist countries or really poor, impoverished places. And I think that's amazing if you have that experience. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I've been to Mozambique, and it's a great country, and there are some, it is a challenging environment for a lot of people living there.
Was the dream to always become an entrepreneur while you were growing up, kind of seeing your dad, or did you have a different dream?
No, I didn't really envision that path for myself, although I was always entrepreneurial. In college, I got involved in a couple of my startups or businesses that I tried, and some were successful, some weren't. But no, I thought I was going to get an education. I, went into the accounting field and then was going to go get an MBA and was really headed on the corporate track of becoming a corporate minion. I mean, that's how I envision it, because that's generally when you go to college. In most cases, not all, but most cases, your professors and counselors that coach you along the way. It's all about getting your degree, learning how to interview, sprucing up that resume, getting a job. I think schooling not so much these days with places that have entrepreneurial programs and some of the great universities in this country that have forged this path of entrepreneurship as alternative careers. That didn't exist when I was coming through school. And so my path was, really geared toward becoming an employee with a large or well-known company. But that DNA, I think, was imprinted on who I was. As I said, when I actually was in that world and in the grind, and accounting can, during the audit season and tax seasons, can become, long hours and a lot of hard work in a desk-oriented environment and not a lot of creativity. I guess my creativity was somewhat stifled. So my genetic imprinting of entrepreneurship kind of eventually emerged, and I took the leap. I mean, didn't make any sense. My father-in-law just about hung me because could not understand why I'd walk out of a good career path and good paying job to strike out on my own. And I went for, several years without any significant income. And it was a lot of pressure.
I can imagine. I mean, I also went corporate out of school. First you went to school, then you went on a mission, right? And then you went corporate?
No, I went for a year of school and then took about 3 years off, 3 full school years off, and then returned and got my degree and then jumped into a accounting firm.
And so, you were speaking about taking that leap, and that's a really difficult leap for someone in the corporate space. I had to take it myself because I was corporate. What made you take that leap? What was that moment that you knew that you had to move?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know. I guess it was finding a soulmate, someone that we were just 4 or 5 years apart in age. He's a little bit older than I was, and we had the same family composition. We each had kids and about same age, and just talking and dreaming about doing our own thing. It took on a life of its own. Chatter, after playing ball and being all sweaty and everything, and just, hanging out and chatting, and eventually turned into, weekend meetings, and those turned into lunches during the week. And before you know it, we're, as I said, figuring out what we could do together. And then taking that leap, I mean, it made no sense financially. I can tell you that much. No sense financially. I had 2 kids at the time and one on the way, and house payments. And I just moved into a new home and was following, kind of the trajectory that you would have for someone that's a few years into their career, and prospects looked pretty good, and then to take a left turn without stopping at the stoplight, and heading down that path. And although it was kind of skinny for a couple of years, things picked up. Yeah. And so, after a few years, we thought, I'm pretty smart. I made a good decision, here, and was able to create something out of nothing. And how cool is that?
I love that. Was your wife supportive?
Oh, yeah. She's fortunate on that end. Not all of my friends have been so fortunate, but no, I got a great woman, and she's always been supportive on every aspect of everything. Very, very few issues on that end, and which can be a big issue when, you're working all those hours and things. And I did work long hours and come home late. Early on, I did a lot of traveling and gone weeks at a time, and she was home with the kids, and it was a challenge sometimes. And sometimes the sledding doesn't always go that well on the home front because, you have these seasons in your life where you do have to create that imbalance in your life for a period of time, because you have to focus to make things work. And if you don't, things can get pretty ugly. The challenge and the mistake I think a lot of people make, and you probably have seen this and knowing a little bit about you, where you're going to go through this peaks and valleys and burnout and things of that nature. It's really hard to self-correct and adjust. And if you don't recalibrate at some point in time and you're burning the proverbial, light at both ends of the tunnel, both emotional, physical, and mental strain can put not only pressure on yourself, but your family and kids. So if there is a regret I have in my life, is that my kids, for a portion of their upbringing, were shortchanged on having, me around. I just was not around. And that was a choice that I made. If I had it to do over again, I would recalibrate and reorganize my priorities, because they're only young once. And although they turned out great, it could have been differently.
Did you reconcile things over time with your kids?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've shared profusely with them my regrets, that I was an absentee father a portion of while they were growing up. The compensating factor, though, was that I had such a great wife. And she never complained, never put me on a guilt trip. She just supported and filled in where she needed to fill in. Because of that, the kids turned out. If I'd have had a different situation there, it probably wouldn't have evolved the way that it did.
Wow. The 7 hatters that are listening, that's why we have hat number 3, the servant. It's the relationship with others. Not only is it important, but it's also crucial for the entrepreneur to get the support from their family. And if you don't pay attention, or at least for a long period of time, don't pay attention to your support system, it's going to be hard to find fulfillment. So as an adult, you started a business. What was that business?
Well, my first venture was, as I said, in the equipment leasing field, and we did a lot of syndication, at that time, and packaging of leases. It was a good business. It wasn't a business that required going into the shop and, working on the floor or retail location or, something like that. It was just a paper mill. You documented things and, a lot of agreements and syndication documents and things of that nature. But I learned a lot. I learned what I didn't know, and some of the management skills when you start scaling a business, as some of your audience out there knows. If you don't have experience in that, you kind of have to learn in the trenches. And sometimes it can be a painful learning experience, an expensive one.
Yep.
And I went through those iterations in my management ability and style. I remember I launched a product once that didn't do well, and I happened to be walking down the hall, and my marketing VP was in the office, and there were a couple of people, and he was chatting, and I stopped outside of his door, and they didn't see me standing there, and they were talking about Marv's Follies, that I had put so much effort into this, and I didn't do the adequate market research. I just thought I knew better. It's one of those situations where I thought that the market was ready for the product, and I just pushed ahead without doing my homework. Didn't work out well. It was very expensive, kind of a flop. And I can remember standing outside of the door, and it was a painful pill to swallow that my own team were not as vocal as they were, talking amongst themselves. They weren't as vocal sharing their feelings with me, which I wish they would have. I don't know if I would have listened or not, but it was a painful pill to swallow as they were chatting about this and laughing and at my expense. I can remember, going home that evening just, in deep thought of what they had said. And I come to the realization that now I needed to pull the plug on this and stop the bleeding. That has served me well. That experience served me well in the future, where I was more thoughtful and didn't charge into the barrage of gunfire thinking that I was going to overwhelm the competition. It was kind of like pick a charge, You're just committed to the end result and haven't adequately thought about what it's going to take to get to the other side. And sometimes you don't make it. And that particular time, I didn't make it.
So was that a franchise business?
That was pre-franchise. That was kind of a startup that we launched and grew. As I said, we did very well for 8 to 10 years in that business. And your audience knows the world changes. You know, there's nothing that stays constant very long. And in business, and it didn't. And as the world started to change, we tried to adapt. And I've often said that I happened to be in the right place at the right time. And I've used the metaphor of being on the ocean with your surfboard, and a wave is coming along, and you didn't create the wave, you didn't create the ocean, you probably didn't make the surfboard. You're just smart enough that when the wave came, you get up and you ride the wave. Yeah. And that's what happened to me. And when the wave went back out, the water went back out, and I had my surfboard and I'm paddling back out, and there weren't any more waves, I thought I could make the wave. And that's what I tried to do. And I found out it was pretty hard to make a wave.
Yes. Wow, I love that.
And so I was waiting for the product that I had launched to do well. And no wave came. Couldn't quite figure out why, but because the market wasn't there, and the demand did not pull the product through. Expensive lesson, but
did you lose it all, or were you able to successfully exit in some respect?
No, we didn't lose. It was tough sledding because we were committed, and a large part of our revenue was gone, and we were trying to replace it. And it became such that we eventually, concurrent with all of this, is that we were getting older. My partner was a few years older, as I mentioned, and his goals and aspirations sort of changed. And I was younger and really wanted to move in a different direction. And we just agreed that it was time to kind of exit out of the business, and that's what we did. We kind of decided that it was time to move on, and we did. And I went left and he went right, and we're still great friends today. And we just pursued a different career path after that. So
you pursued franchising right after that?
Yeah, I had done in the leasing business. I did quite a bit in the franchise environment, providing leases and things of that in that world. And I just got intrigued with the whole process of how franchising worked. And as a business model, it's quite an innovation, actually. It's using other people's capital to build a brand. And you get it has a good mix of entrepreneurship, because they're the classification of people out there that want to be in business for themselves, captain their own ship, but they don't have the tools really that a founder entrepreneur, a startup entrepreneur has. There's different skill set between an executor entrepreneur and a startup entrepreneur. A startup entrepreneur is creative. They're highly motivated and, can stare into the abyss and not blink. Envision something that doesn't exist and pull it through to reality, where there's another type of entrepreneur that, comes out of the corporate environment, tired of that world, and they have really good skills, have developed those talents of execution, management, sometimes in the sales and marketing arena, or maybe in the financial arena or the operational arena. And they bring those skills to entrepreneurship, and franchising can be a good fit in that situation, where the model has been developed and it takes a high degree of execution to take the model into a new market, new geography, perhaps opening up and building a brand in a market where all you have to do is paint by numbers, because the model has already been developed, and you have to execute that model in a new market and build the brand in that market. And that's a different skill set than an entrepreneur that is a startup founder entrepreneur a lot of times. They can be overlapping skills, but the stage of how a business model evolves and is built is different in a franchise than it is a startup model.
For me, the worst point in my experience, I was on the bathroom floor in fetal position, sucking my thumb. Did you ever have that emotional rock bottom, or maybe more than one? But I'm assuming you at least had one.
Oh, yeah. I think every entrepreneur that scales a business has those looking over the chasm. I don't think I ever made it to the bathroom floor like you did, but I had my dark moments, when you just don't see a way out. You have accumulated debt, and things aren't going well, and key people leave, and competition enters the marketplace, and you just don't see a way out. And that's when the stress, if you're in my case, I was raising a family. I had kids getting ready to go to college, and the pressures of that and different things that are going on, and things go sideways on you beyond your control. And you can see that this house of cards, figuratively speaking, that you've built, that is morphing into a real structure, becomes very wobbly, and you don't know if everything is going to collapse around you. Yeah, so and it's those stressful situations that put the gray hair on your head. I have some gray hair, you can see.
Oh, I do too, my friend. I do too. I'm losing hair too, so it's not just gray. But it's amazing how many people 2008 and COVID experienced this rocky house of cards, and they just have to get through it. But you did, right? So you successfully exited your franchise business, and then what's there to do after franchising? What was next for you?
Well, I exited on two levels in franchising. I had my regional franchise concepts, and the opportunity came to acquire one of the franchise companies that I was a regional for, and going from a regional franchisee, to becoming the actual franchisor. And I transitioned into that world, exiting, some of these regional franchises and acquiring the company, and then spinning out a separate company from the company I acquired, and then, exiting that. And so after this last exit a few years ago, that's when I pulled up. I was in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and left that, rather hustle bustle part of the world, and moved up to the Sierra foothills, which is if any one of your audience are familiar with this part of the world, it's on the way up to Lake Tahoe, which is a spectacularly beautiful place, and much more rural living than I am right now. And I really thought I would just kind of wind it down, move from the fast lane over to the slow lane, and I made that transition across the different lanes, and I found that being in the slow lane isn't all it's cracked up to be. So I got to thinking about, my career. The choices are do something different, start something over. But I just got to thinking about the different types of exits that I'd had, and this last one, which involved private equity and boards of directors, and it was at a scale that I just wasn't all that familiar with. And if I'd have been more dialed in fact, if I'd have been more dialed in on any of the exits, because what an entrepreneur does, at least this is the philosophy that I've evolved and my thought process has evolved, is that entrepreneurs become very good at what they do because they do it every day. And they face different challenges, and they're able to continue to knock off the rough edges and continue to hone their craft. And they become really quite an expert at what they do. Some of them become world class. And when it comes to monetizing all that expertise that is encapsulated into a business entity, a brand, and you want to monetize that because you don't do it every day, you tend not to be very good at it, or you don't anticipate all the things and all of the components of putting together a solid and smooth transition to exit out of your business. And most importantly, is to monetize and optimize the value that you've created. You may have created a lot of value, and depending on who your buyer is, they may be able to take advantage of your inexperience, the structuring of the deal, because they do it every day, all day long. Because you got to remember, on the other side of the table, depending on who the buyer is, this is what they do for their living. And they become like you as an expert in your craft and your service and product. You're really good at it. Well, their service and their expertise is in deal structuring. Yours may or may not be. And so you are sometimes somewhat at a disadvantage when you're sitting across the table from either the money people who are structuring the deal and providing the capital, or an acquisition team for a large company that this is what they get due. And they're bonused and compensated for their rate of return and the number of deals that they close, or whatever other metrics, depending on the fund or the buyer. They're compensated that way. And so they may be really good at giving you what you ask for as far as the dollar amount of your business. But in structuring the deal as such is that you may never see some of those proceeds.
Wow.
One of the best ways, or the more crafty ways that happens, is what is called an earnout. And sometimes those earnouts, meaning that they want you to stay around to help with the transition of the business or help manage the business for a period of time, but they structure the metrics for you to qualify for being paid that earnout amount. I'll give you we'll just pick a number here. Say you sell your business for $10 million or $1 million or whatever it is, and 20% is an earnout. And that's going to be over 4 years. So you're going to get 5% a year over 4 years. But that 5% payout is really contingent on profitability, hitting certain profitability marks or gross margin amounts or whatever the metrics are. But those are structured in such a way is that it's almost impossible for you to meet them. If it's tied to profitability and you think, well, that's fine, I've met those profitability figures, and you did that while you were sitting in the captain's chair, making budgetary decisions and being able to control spend and control personnel and control expansion and scaling and things that you kind of became really good at in growing your business, but all of now you've sold your company and now you're an employee of that company and your earnout is tied to meeting certain metrics. But lo and behold, the decision-making process is removed from your desk to somebody else's desk, and they're compensated on different metrics than you're being compensated on the earnout, and they may be compensated on meeting their margins or their profitability, and which is in conflict with you being able to meet your growth targets or your profitability. And so they remove a marketing budget, cut it by 50%. And you're not going, because of that change, or they remove personnel or they replace personnel that isn't as competent as they should be. And so these things that you're no longer in control of affect your ability to achieve that earnout. And so what you were expecting, that 20%, kind of disappears, or a majority of it disappears. And so, as a lot of entrepreneurs will tell you, is that whatever you accept on selling your company, whatever you get in cash, just kind of figure that's what you're going to get. And that if the earnout able to be achieved. It's just frosting on the cake a lot of times. It doesn't have to be that way if you understand how to structure a deal so that you aren't tied to things that you don't control. You're tied to things that you can control, and much higher probability of meeting those earn-out targets. So it's things like that that you don't anticipate or don't quite see how all the pieces fit together. And that's why I say entrepreneurs become really good at their craft, but when it comes to exiting, they only stand at the plate once or twice, unless they're a serial entrepreneur. They do it all the time. Then they know the process and how to structure these deals. But for those entrepreneurs, which is most of us, get 1, 2, 3 shots in our career to stage an exit.
I guess I was lucky because I had an earn-out opportunity come my way for PromoMesh, the current company that I'm running, and looked good on paper. But quickly I said no. So, so you're not playing golf, right? You're kind of learning about this stuff, but what are you doing with your life now?
Well, as I said, I just got to thinking about the whole process of if entrepreneurs had the ability to see around the corner when it comes to their exits and be a little bit more anticipatory on what to expect, that would probably be something that would be of a valuable service, and somehow I could give back to what I've accomplished in my career. I'd be able to help others along that path, and that would be a good feeling and a good thing to do. And so I decided to start this podcast, and there are a lot of podcasts out there that interview entrepreneurs that have sold or exited their businesses, and they share their story, and I listen to a lot of them, myself. But I took a little bit different tact. I said, the people that are the deal makers, the mergers and acquisitions advisors, the investment bankers, business brokers, CPAs, wealth managers, transaction attorneys, those people that are in the transaction flow and deal with business exits all the time. That's what they do for a living. And they have a whole portfolio full of clients and stories and deals that they have been involved in that they can, bring to the table and share the good, the bad stories, some of the real ugly stories that they've been involved in, and the takeaways, so why they went well, why they didn't. Anyone listening to those stories, they can avoid kind of the minefield, so they don't have to, go through the painful learning experiences. They can learn from other people's stories and other people's experiences. So I started this podcast called Business Exit Stories. Each episode has 4 deal stories, a couple that went well, a couple that didn't, and as told by the people that were involved in it. And in all different sizes of businesses, different industries, different composition of types of entrepreneurs, partnerships and sole proprietors and family operations and corporate deals and all sorts of stuff. And it's just a good read. And so that's what I've been doing for the last several years. And I've just thoroughly enjoyed it. Like you, hosting a podcast, you get to talk to a lot of interesting people, and you can add value. You can actually change people's lives, because there's nothing more heart-wrenching than to hear a story of an entrepreneur that spent decades, if not a lifetime of hard work, building their company, and then on the last lap, drop the baton and exit with very little. In some cases, in real tragic situations where they never were able to exit and had to wind down their business because of mistakes they made during the planning process that they totally unavoidable, but they just either for their ego or for other reasons made mistakes that turned out to be rather catastrophic for themselves, their families, their employees. And if you can help avoid a few of those situations, you've made a difference in the world. So that's kind of how I approached it. And then, after doing the podcast for a while, I started getting feedback, kind of what's next type of thing. And so I thought, I'll just put all these stories and kind of what I've learned over the years into a book. And so I used the metaphor of pack your parachute, based on the concept that pilots don't pack their parachute when the engines are on fire. And they have that parachute packed and ready to go, because you never know when you're running a business what can go sideways. You may get a unexpected medical diagnosis. You may go have a partner that you get in conflict with, or competition enters the marketplace, technology changes, whatever. If you have that parachute ready to pack, you're much more likely to be able to step away from your business more quickly and more profitably than if you don't. And so I'm in the process of writing that book right now. And so life's been good. I just enjoy the whole process of providing some insight for people. Sometimes the largest asset that they have or ever will have is the business they built. And you just want to make sure that people can monetize all that hard work.
I love that. And the book's coming out next year, right? You're on track.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's hard to write a book.
A lot harder than I thought.
Exactly. So,
sounds good in theory.
Sounds good in theory. I know. I'm in the process of thinking and trying to do it, and it's definitely harder than I thought as well. So what advice would you give a corporate individual who is looking to jump ship and become an entrepreneur? Because you wrote The Parachute is not your first book, it's your second. The first one was all about the transition from corporate to entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah, I think that it's especially difficult, I think, for corporate folks, having been one of those myself in my career, to make that shift. I think that it's really challenging because you don't necessarily have the DNA footprint to be an entrepreneur, to do the startup thing. And so you have to be very careful if you migrate from corporate into a startup situation, because generally people coming out of the corporate world are mid-career or well into their career anyway, and they're risking a lot, getting involved in a startup or something. And so my advice is that you make that transition very cautiously. You take time to evaluate it and to assess if you're going to be adequately capitalized to be able to pull that off, and that if things don't go well, that you have your options, there for you. The theory of burning all the ships so that you have no option sounds good in theory, but if you have a family and everything, they can become kind of dicey sometimes.
Try not to tell your boss to shove it when you're exiting his office or her office. So, yeah. What was that?
I was going to say I've made it a practice for whenever I have a transition point in my life not to tick people off, because you never know when your paths are going to cross again.
You never know. So 4 decades of experience, and we just received a lesson on what to do for a corporate individual going into the entrepreneurial world. What is the biggest lesson after 4 decades that you'd pass to someone who's in their first of their decades as an entrepreneur?
Well, I often get the question, and it's a valid question, what in the heck should I worry about exiting my business now when that isn't going to happen for years down the road? I'm too busy building my business to worry about how I'm going to exit it. I get it. I understand that sentiment. However, you're going to spend a lot of time building your company, your brand, hundreds, if not tens of thousands of hours of hard work. You want to make sure that at the end of the journey, that there is a pot of gold, that there's something that you can monetize. And that generally doesn't happen unless there's some forethought given to it. Generally speaking, those that start getting into the frame of mind of thinking about what they're building, and that at some point in time, they're going to want to monetize that work. And for that to happen, to be able to optimize that exit, is that you're going to have to start planning in advance. And so this whole thing of why do I want to worry about it now? I'm busy building my business. It's not necessarily that you're going to spend a lot of time in total hours working on an exit plan, but it's more of a thought process. It's a philosophy. It's how you think about decisions in your business. And that comes down to, if you're a business that has a lease, that's a key component to how you operate your business. And you're signing a 5-year lease or a 3-year lease with 3 5-year options, whatever the situation. You want to make sure that you think about how that lease is going to impact your exit. What happens if you sell the business in 5 years, 6 years, 7 years? how is that lease going to be viewed or benefit the transition of you out of the business? And there are some real sad stories on my podcast, Business Exit Stories, of where a lease killed the deal because it was not assignable, or loan documents, or the people you hire and employment agreements that you have with those folks. It's not that you spend a lot of time in total time commitment to planning an exit, but it's that thought process that you incorporate into your decision-making process things that are going to impact an exit down the road. And that becomes, and over time, these things accumulate and will either facilitate a smooth transition and an exit, or they will become problematic when someone is going through their due diligence checklist that's buying your business, and they'll come back with this long list of things that create risk in their business to the transaction. And that risk always translates into a reduced valuation on your business or some very restrictive terms on your transition of your business. And so if you get into that frame of mind and you start lining things up that aren't going to be problematic when you exit your business, you're going to be in a much stronger position to optimize the value of your business down the road.
So if you build it, they're not always going to come your way. And I think there's a sobering statistic that you mentioned. Out of all the businesses that are on sale, currently, as an example, and at a single time, 80% of them never get sold. Is that statistic still valid? Or?
Yeah, that's a statistic that's endured over a fairly long period of time. It's not generally known or talked about. And I know people that will, kind of have a discussion around those statistics, because it is all businesses, large, small businesses, including one-man shops and things of that nature. But the point is that there's a lot of businesses out there that just never find a buyer. And so they just end up winding down and closing shop. And or if they are sold, it's not the type of exit that was anticipated or thought that they would have. And generally speaking, it's all avoidable. Positioning a business for a successful and profitable exit is not rocket science, but it is not easy to do either. It's a process. It's like anything else. It's a process. If you understand the process and you follow the things that are critical to that process and you do it over a period of time, things will generally work out well. And you'll be in that 15 to 20% of businesses that do sell. And those that do sell, you'll be in the top 5-10% of those that do sell as far as optimizing the value. And it's not that hard, but if you totally ignore it and you don't worry about it, the outcome is generally not that favorable. You may get lucky. As I say, you may be in the right place at the right time and you may have a home run, but statistically, that's not how the data lines up.
Well, I'm glad we were introduced, and I've learned so much during this podcast. And I know that we're going to continue our relationship because I have a baby and I need to exit one of these days, and I need to do it in the right fashion. So we'll be speaking, but I'd like to close out my interview with the following question. Who did you have to stop being, and who did you need to become to manifest your current success?
Well, I think that's a great question. And it's introspectively, as I've looked, over my time that I've evolved as a person and as an entrepreneur, the thing that I think has benefited me the most as far as changing from what I was to what I could become or want to be, is just realizing that my success is integrally tied to me facilitating the success of others. If you think about it, an entrepreneur, if they can help their team, their employees achieve their dreams and, become happier and financially more successful, it's inevitable that the probability of the entrepreneur then achieving his dreams and accomplishing his goals just almost becomes a laydown. Because when you help others achieve their dreams, generally speaking, yours will be achieved as well, and probably much more than you ever thought possible.
A man after my own heart. I love that. So tell the Seven Hatters where they can find you, where the podcast is, what else you're offering.
Well, anyone that loves podcasts, I love podcasts. I spend hours and hours a week listening to podcasts because I gain insights from folks like yourself that have so much to share and bring on guests to share. And, it's wherever you get your podcast, just go to Business Exit Stories. Search your podcast that way on Apple Podcast or Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcast. And also, I get a lot of feedback over the years that I've been doing this, kind of what's next. If I wanted to start thinking about an exit, so I offer a kind of a report that I've prepared. And that report can be found just by going to the website, businessexitstories.com/report, the numeral 2. That's /report, the number 2. And that'll direct you to a page where you can download this report. And it just gives you kind of an overview on how you can dramatically increase the value of your business without breaking too much of a sweat, and to give you some really insights that you can start this process of thinking about your business exit and not taking a lot of time doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And once they get on your mailing list, then when the book comes out, you'll let everybody know?
Absolutely. Yeah, that'd be fun.
And definitely check out the piece that the Marvin is providing, because Parachute is also an acronym, and we didn't get a chance to really speak about it in this podcast, but the PDF has everything you need to know about it. So a little cliffhanger, get people to become interested and learn more. Marvin, it was such a pleasure having you on the show. I will put all the links, including your LinkedIn page, in the show notes. I appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate your years of service. And I'm so happy that, you made the mistakes that you made so you can help others avoid theirs. Thank you for coming on the 7 Hats.
It's been delightful. I appreciate the input that you've provided to your 7 Hatters out there. And I know that for those that are building a business, you just want to make sure that you can optimize it at exit.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Marvin. Let's end today with the segment of the show that I refer to as What Can We Hang Our Hat On? And here's my takeaway. Back in 2005, as a first-time entrepreneur, the term exit strategy never crossed my mind. I was completely focused on building my company and creating value. I made many decisions that would have hurt my chances of monetizing my baby. Think about it. All the late nights, the weekends, the sacrifices that we make as entrepreneurs. And imagine not being able to cash in because of lack of planning. Since I started my journey as an entrepreneur, I have faced many investors. And what I can say with certainty is that most, if not all of them, were experts in what they do and understand the game better than I did. As Marvin reminds us, if you're an entrepreneur, it's a wise decision to start early and plan ahead. You don't want to leave it to chance and lose out on your baby's full potential. I want to thank Marvin once again for joining us so that we can all benefit from his wisdom. And until next time, if you found this episode helpful, please hit that subscribe button and tell other entrepreneurs out there what value you receive from it, so we can attract even more high-quality people into our 7 Hats community. So for now, I will bid you farewell and success on your journey. And until next time, my name is Yuval Selik, and I tip my hat to you.